Timeless never-never of Central Australia. A harsh, beautiful country which tempted early explorers and then drove them mad with heat and thirst. A land fractured and folded into a jagged jaw, or puckered and smoothed into eerie shapes by the weathering of a millennia. Where scrub, desiccated by drought and then quenched by flash flood, meets prehistoric mesas and canyons. A thoroughly unusual place where the eagles are at home, wheeling and soaring on the hot updrafts from the desert floor. It goes without saying that flying an unpowered glider here is a risky business. But in 1976, a West German glider pilot, Werner Grosse, proved that it was possible. He stunned the world gliding fraternity with a flight of 1,000 kilometres across this rugged terrain. Now, 6 years later, he's captured 23 world records for speed and distance soaring, most of them achieved in the centre of Australia.
If I can see the area from 10,000 feet up, then it looks like a love affair. When you come down to, let's say, 1,000 feet or 1,500, you hate the country because there's no place where you could land, and it would be, even if you jump out with a parachute, it would be very difficult to survive.
Oswald? Oswald, bist du schon auf?
Oh, no.
Good morning, it's 5 o'clock.
No, get away.
Okay.
I went to bed.
Just a moment, I take the temperature. Oh, this is good day. Most of the cloud is past.
The average daily December-January temperature is 37.9 degrees Celsius. The blistering climate makes marathon flying a physically draining experience. Grosse wards off fatigue by building stamina with a grueling 10-kilometre run with crewman Oswald Kohlmeier.
I must really say that Hans Werner, he's, for his age, a really extraordinary good runner, and of course his whole physical condition is very good, and I really think that's very important for all the flying he does.
We are very, very lucky that we get along as well as we do, and we make fun of each other, and we do not take each other too earnest, and we get along without all these difficulties, or most of the difficulties that people describe when dealing in between so far different age groups.
I have the better condition, but in the end he really tries to beat me. Although he knows he can't beat me, but even he still tries it every time.
And you won't see too many other zealots pounding around Alice Springs in the mornings. Everything happens here at a fairly leisurely pace. Cradled by the MacDonald Ranges, which cut across the territory for hundreds of kilometres, it's pretty much a feat of endurance making it through a normal day without sunstroke. Very few locals, or the 200,000 tourists that pass through the town annually, know much about the man who, during the summer, flies continual sorties overhead into the desert and scrub. Or that the Alice could soon become a sort of mecca for European and American glider pilots, held in thrall by the thought of such flights. The average European tourist is certainly tired of flying and is more than delighted to escape the northern winter and slop around in thongs and shorts. To take in some of the town's history, its gold and ruby rushes, and its part in the establishing of a telegraph link across the wasteland continent at the turn of the century, when there were no roads and poor communication. Alice is no longer completely cut off from the rest of Australia, but it's still 1,100 kilometres from another town of any size. Fuel stops and garages are few and far between out here. If you break down outside of Alice, the towing costs could exceed the price of the vehicle. The combination of fuel costs and distance keep these massive trucks continually on the move. Amongst the largest hauliers on public highways in the world, these road trains manage to keep commodity prices within tolerable limits for Territorians. Essentials like the town's beer and spirits are trucked in from Darwin. The Stuart Highway, which stretches 1,700 kilometres south to Adelaide, is just too rough. But then Alice is a convenient staging post to explore what's beyond, be it a day trip to Ayers Rock or the Gorges, or a serious assault on the world distance flying record.
That good. We wouldn't go on a real big triangle today because we have still this cloud down in the southwest, and what we should do is just look for a good 750 kilometer triangle up to the north and to the perhaps to the northeast first because of the wind, and then to the northwest.
This should be done only by people who have done a lot of gliding, who are mentally stable and who would not panic easily, and who are not coming there just for the sake of becoming famous. Because you are so far away from other people. Even if you got a survival beacon, it would be a very, very difficult thing to go and find you in time before you perished from the heat and your evaporation.
Alice Springs was once the centre of an inland sea. Now it's surrounded by desert and no man's land. In 1980, Werner Grosse ran the gauntlet of the roughest terrain the territory could offer and completed the triangle of 1,306 kilometres in one day. He flew against the wind on one leg of the course and completed the marathon flight at an average speed better than most small power planes. It was an extraordinary feat, the equivalent of flying in a straight line from Alice Springs north to Darwin.
Alice Springs, Stadtbankhof 17, nach GSB 0 müssen wir machen, ja? Ist klar. Dann nach Jervois Homestead und Barrow Creek. So, first is the...
Everything about Grosse's current safari to Australia, as in the other years, reflects a large investment in time and money. He admits to being unashamedly obsessed by gliding, pouring a fortune every year into pursuing his gliding fantasies, which he quickly turns to reality. Methodically now, all his equipment must be readied for today's flight. Weight is a critical factor, but Grosse knows through past campaigns that despite weather conditions, none of this can be left behind. All 35 kilos will eventually be crammed into the fuselage of the glider before takeoff.
I think that's better now, huh?
Today, Grosse has planned a 750-kilometre speed triangle. The forecast weather is not boisterous enough for a long-distance attempt.
Well, it's working, and the crash beacon, and we test the crash beacon if it's transmitting. Let's see. Goes on. Oh, well, I hope you never need it, huh? Take this water. You got all the other water bottles out there in the glider, yeah?
Yeah.
Then the parachute is in the glider. Oxygen is in the glider.
Or the mask is in here.
If Grosse was forced down and stricken in the desert, it could be a week before he was found.
The food is in the glider already.
So on every flight, he'll take spare radios, a medical kit, food, tools, even delicate solar cells to power an emergency radio.
And well, where is this little...
That weak radio signal for help coming out of the desert would be received here at Alice Springs Airport. Grosse has flown out of the strip for 4 years now. As yet, he hasn't had to call for search and rescue assistance. The airport is busy with a growing tourist industry. It's also the only major Australian airport that permits gliding operations. It's obviously potentially hazardous to have unpowered sailplanes in the circuit area with commuter jets. Grosse has always known that should he become a nuisance or a liability, he might be told to leave. This year, 2 more European pilots, lured by the chance of making spectacular flights, arrived to fly out of the airport. Jean-Marc Perry, a 33-year-old Swiss nuclear medicine technician, has flown in South Africa. Before this campaign is over, though, he'll discover that the Red Centre is not quite so easily tamed. Paul Bougard, a Belgian, has flown 80,000 kilometres in gliders. He was ranked 6th in a recent World Championship. Together, they shipped out their $40,000 glider in the cigar-shaped canister and went into debt. They spent a year planning this attempt to fly the dream of all distance glider pilots, the 1,000-kilometre triangle. The Swiss-Belgian team are particularly fortunate to be flying from the airport and not from the Bond Springs gliding strip, 30 kilometres north of Alice. This dusty, graded strip is where Grosse first came to feel out the territory. It was a tough shakedown, but he still managed the first and only 1,000-kilometre triangle flown in the last 5 years in the territory. He found, though, there were some dangerous drawbacks. No landing lights, no telephone, no long-range radio facilities.
Voilà, Gary.
The local gliding enthusiasts still use winch launchers to propel them into the air. A mile of fencing wire hauled by a converted jalopy. The winch operator is in a cage because if the wire breaks during a launch, it could cut you in half. The rather primitive conditions of the strip are the main reason why more world record hunting pilots don't wish to operate here. However, there are definite limitations as to how many high-performance sailplanes could be safely integrated at Alice Airport. It's now 11:15 a.m. and already the temperature has climbed to 34 degrees Celsius. Oswald must now complete preparations to the glider, while Grosse continues fine-tuning his flight planning and weather briefing. The first glimpse of the ASW-17, which Grosse has used for all of his solo Australian records, is a sight to quicken the heart. The 19-metre wingspan, covered with protective dust sleeves, just fits inside the hangar. Oswald will now begin working through a checklist which will keep him busy right up to takeoff. A quiet, unassuming academic, he's presently writing a thesis on an obscure area of aerodynamics. Over the last 2 years, he's become an invaluable aid to Grosse's rather eccentric desire to fly a glider further than any other man on Earth.
He is a very successful glider pilot. He has flown his own 1,000-kilometer triangle out of Alice 2 years ago, and it makes you secure to know there's someone on the ground who would arrange whatever is needed in case you come into some kind of trouble.
Having an innate sense of the weather is what has established Grosse as something of a gliding guru. Here is part of the secret of his vision. A small, high-resolution satellite monitor in the back of his rented house. The machine scans the satellite NOAA as it crosses the continent north to south, delivering a small, easily manageable Polaroid. The snap gives quite surprising detail of cloud build-up in the area. It allows him to fly on educated hunches when the weather is marginal or there are thunderstorms predicted.
Well, it definitely has prevented me from doing foolish things, such as going into thunderstorm situations, which otherwise I wouldn't have had a clue that they exist.
Thunderstorms, which are byproducts of cyclonic cells embedded near the top end of Australia. These storms could literally rip a glider's wings off. But the moist monsoonal maritime air dries and warms up as it crosses the scorching northern desert, forming fluffy cumulus cloud at high altitude. You start to understand the sort of forces at play when you see your first Northern Territory dust devil whirling its plume skywards. Here then is a thermal current in creation. It's these elevators of air, usually invisible, that can keep a glider aloft all day, if you know where to find them. Grosse is now committed to making his final calculations, using every meteorological clue he can piece together.
Perhaps around about 37 for a 5 p.m. takeoff. Right, yeah, sure.
Morning, Pine.
G'day, Hans.
How's things today?
Oh, a little bit better than it's been.
His briefing sessions with Flight Service Operator Brian Riley are probing interrogations. He pores over the temperature trace, revealing temperature, moisture and wind speeds aloft. This data will indicate just when the elements are in a volatile equilibrium, and that's when he'll make his dash.
What he's attempting to do revolves around a very fine line. If weather conditions are marginally one way, soaring to any record-breaking height is just not on. Conversely, if a set of conditions marginally the other way occur, there's a danger of thunderstorm development. Now, Hans has been flying in this country for long enough to know all too well the dangers of thunderstorms. He's very, very conscious of them, and as it pains to update his information as the day progresses.
Hans will maintain the vigil, modifying his course or even abandoning should things deteriorate dramatically. Oswald proceeds into the final preparations. He's about to do something a little strange. 80 kilos of water will be added to the wings, improving the glider's climb rate in strong thermals by subtle changes to the aerodynamic angle of the wings. So now Grosse, very much the self-propelled and self-funded champion, with no flashy endorsements or contracts to live up to, is ready to go. But for how long?
Well, if only I knew. I'm very much surprised that I can do these things still at the age of 59. You see, when I was flying in the Air Force, everyone who was older than 28 was just starting to smell, and if he was 30, he supposed him being dead. And our old generals, who might have been at that time 40, 45, and 50, well, we thought they are, well, downhill for a long time. And I've got no doubt that younger fellows nowadays are feeling exactly the same, because the world isn't changing in that respect. But once you get older, you regard yourself as being right in the middle of activities for all the time, if you can keep fit. And so I got a different idea of what you can do and how much you can fly and how long you can go on flying. And I'm really not sure how I should answer your question. I might lose interest next year or the year after, and then again I might go on for another 5 years.
Grosse's dizzying hunt for lift begins. Attempting to fly 750 kilometres in just a little over 5 hours. Pushing his aircraft up to 200 kilometres per hour as he darts from turning point to turning point. Prospecting for every ounce of rising energy from early afternoon thermals. This year around the Alice has been unseasonably wet. The big booming thermals are diminished in strength because of the uncharacteristic green cover, spread like a mantle across the red centre. So Grosse has turned his attention to the few speed-distance triangles in the record books that don't have his name beside them. There are precious few places where Grosse could bring his fragile glider down as he traverses the McDonnell and Creekoff ranges. Crisscrossed with glacial gorges and ravines, they'd tear his aircraft to pieces. Finding thermals is a constant problem. One moment safe, thousands of feet up, and then suddenly scrabbling for lift in dead air.
Sometimes you're lucky if you see an eagle
circling up with yourself and showing you where it is. And then, of course, you are real lucky, because the eagles usually fly in the best thermals around, because that's just their nature.
His flight takes him southwest toward the Western Australian border. Out here there's very few distinctive landmarks, except the minaret domes of the Olgas and Uluru, the Earth Mother, Ayers Rock. For him, the windswept monoliths are like signposts in the desert, smoothed by the alchemy of years and born through some momentous convulsion of nature. The Australian Aborigines, who've lived here for 40,000 years, made this looming mammoth a totem in their dream time, believing the rock to be the home of the rainbow serpent, which slithered over and down its sides. There are two different levels to look at the things. I'm usually amazed at such as, well, what have you ever done there, when I look at the slides I take when I'm flying. The slides of what's not a landscape, it's a moonscape. And some parts are just so inaccessible, and you couldn't even survive if you jump with a parachute, because it's so rough. And but of course these things are not so obvious when you are trying to look for lift, and you are so engaged in finding lift that you would not really be aware of the dangers the landscape is giving you. Safely home, but the record eludes him by minutes. It was also a bad day at Bond Springs glider strip.
Unit 5 to Ellis Base. Yes, Base. In attendance with a photographer at Bond Springs. Glider accident. DOA.
A grim scene. A young pilot practicing for the upcoming Northern Territory Gliding Championships got into trouble on the winch launch.
Department of Transport investigators out here first light tomorrow. Unit 5 out.
The plane heeled over into a spiral dive and hit the ground at high speed. A sobering reminder of what can happen in the event of pilot error or equipment failure with these fragile craft.
And on the local scene, tragedy struck at Bond Springs glider strip when a 24-year-old Darwin pilot was killed instantly when his all-metal glider spun and nosedived after a winch launch. Local pilots were stunned by the accident. It was the first major accident on the strip in 20 years. And now tomorrow's weather looks like another scorcher. A ridging high situated to the north over the Gibson Desert will push temperatures into the low 40s. There'll be a bit of cloud around tonight, and tomorrow there's the chance of late afternoon thunderstorms. Temperatures around Fink and Oodnadatta could go as high as 44 degrees Celsius. It's 7:03 now, and now it's back to the music.
It's 11 a.m. and Jean-Marc is airborne in the Nimbus 2. This is what he came for, an attempt at the 1,000. Out to Argadagada, and then to McLaren Homestead, and hopefully home to Alice Springs.
Alice Springs, direct to Connerwell, cruise not above flight level 140. Remain west, I say again, west of the Stewart Highway until advised.
It's a great day for flying, but Hans Werner is temporarily grounded. The water bags inside the wings have ruptured, and there's water leaking into the fuselage, flooding his equipment and dangerously altering the plane's balance. It's the fourth time in the last fortnight that the bags have burst and been repaired. Grosse's crew, and anybody that can be co-opted, work feverishly to get the plane back in the air while it's still possible to fly a record task.
Die Flügel noch höher liegen, damit es noch ausläuft. Habt ihr schon gemacht, ja. I've been doing all these other flights in the other years with less ballast. There's the original ballast bags, which carry about 20 gallons or so. And then I decided for the real good flights, speedy flights, might pay to have a bit more ballast. So I got new equipment, and well, it just failed.
In situations like these, the strain of performance flying begins to tell.
Well, I'm definitely tend to be tense. And I would get very nervous if things go wrong in the preparation of the flight. And this might be a very, very hard time for my crew, because this feeling of nervousness is spreading to the crew and it's rebounding to me, and so we get ourselves very, very tight and nervous before takeoff, and then things might go wrong.
Hello. Was ist das mit dem Schleppflugzeug? Alles klar? Nein. Das liegt nicht.
The crew work for 3 hours on refitting the bags, but Grosse was not happy and decides to abort today's attempt. Things don't always go smoothly.
Glider Yankee Delta, report present position. Glider Yankee Delta, transmissions unreadable. Say again.
Yankee Delta, losing altitude, actually approximately 100 miles north of the field on the Thunderway Highway. They have to land there. Do you read me, Alice Tower?
Glider Yankee Delta, please activate crash beacon and call us when you have landed. We'll notify your ground crew this end. Good luck.
The next day, Paul Bugard drives into the scrub to retrieve Jean-Marc. All he knows is that Yankee Delta is somewhere on the Sandover Highway. The plane's distress beacon did not operate, and Jean-Marc is out of radio range. Amazingly, Jean-Marc, losing altitude and light, managed to land on the only stretch of the highway which was wide enough for the Nimbus's 23-metre wings. Anywhere else within 50 kilometres, and the plane would have been dismembered. Jean-Marc hauled the glider off the road, hitched a lift, and slept at nearby Woodgreen Station. It's been quite an unusual day for both Jean-Marc and station owner Bob Purvis. It's not every day a Swiss pilot lands virtually in your backyard.
Everything okay, but just landing middle of the road and I take the glider away.
Unprompted, Bob Purvis knocks up a billy tea, and the two settle back to wait for Paul to arrive. At least the glider was accessible. It could have come down where there were no roads. If there was anything worth salvaging, it would have had to have been cradled out by helicopter.
Lorsque nous avons suivi le vol de Jean-Marc,
Jean-Marc, being forced down, proved to me we must give this country much respect. I have flown 2,000 hours, but even that is not enough. I was very worried for him because we actually lost radio contact when he landed.
So, out of radio range with no survival beacon to attract help, it had been a close call. But glider and pilot unscathed, the two were able to have a chuckle about it later. Jean-Marc admitted, though, he felt he could have been better prepared.
I think in the bush country you have to be ready a long time ago before landing, because you never know what's happened. In fact, in my preparation I get the survey equipment. First some water. I have 5 liters water. I get all clothes for the desert, also big suit, big shoe to if you have to walk a long time, but it will be okay. The only way I've not maybe not perfectly my preparation, it was on the Maybe you need some matches, some small things you have forget, and some matches to do a fire or some pocket lamp, because the night you are coming very soon, and after it's dark and you couldn't do nothing if you are not equipped with the light.
Somewhat chastened by the flaws in their planning, the two pilots head back to Alice Springs. But they still later managed to consolidate sufficiently for each to fly Swiss and Belgian national records for the 750 kilometres before returning to Europe, leaving Werner Grosse as still the only man to complete a 1,000-plus kilometre task in the Northern Territory.
Brother Quebec India and Hotel Whiskey, clearance initially. Operate north of the field, west of Emily Gap, cruise not above 6,000.
Grosse will have one last try to grasp the world's 750-kilometre speed record. But it hasn't been a good year so far. What if this highly motivated man fails?
How many people have the chance to be here in the center, be away from the cold of Europe, be in hot sunshine, and would be able to do some flying, look at the country? So life is not only consisting out of world records. How could it be? So I'm quite happy with being here and doing some flying, even if the weather permits me not to do a world record.
There's perhaps time then to marvel at mirages like this. Palm Valley, a lush and steamy oasis where giant kangaroos once grazed on its swampy banks. Now it's one of the few permanent waterholes within hundreds of square kilometres. Enclosed by rampart cliffs, the valley is an extraordinary microclimate. There's only one other place in Australia where these 300-year-old Livingstonian palms thrive, and that's 2,000 kilometres away. Their presence in this primordial gorge is a botanical mystery. But sights like these must only be fleeting glimpses as Grosse pushes glider Hotel Whiskey on to the next turning point. Today's flight for a marathon pilot is more like a sprint. Nonetheless draining, he must focus all his energy and experience to succeed. Pinpoint navigation, a deft, intuitive hand on the controls, coolness under pressure, and a gambler's eye to the changing fortunes of the weather. On to Erie Lake Amadeus, a glassy crust above a quagmire of blue salt mud, a boggy expanse which blocked explorers in their attempts to reach Western Australia. Having made his final glide calculations, he prepares for the dash home, settling back into his solitary, vaporous world to float on invisible eddies with the ease that has made him a champion.
when the weather is good and I'm really fed up with the business, I'm really questioning the sense of life on the ground and all that hassle, all this bumper-to-bumper business on the roads, then I just have to get away. And I just hop into my glider, and this gives you a certain feeling of really being above your problems. You couldn't pay for it. You have to look for the means of nature to get you up and away.
Grosse touches down in twilight with a new world record. 750 kilometres in 5 hours, 13 minutes, at an average speed of 143 kilometres per hour. There's no champagne, no winner's circle, no triumphant accolades. But then that's the way of the sport. Nearly thwarted by a wet season, Grosse, the blend of dreamer and pragmatist, has shown his grit. For a man who's never let his age get in the way in the past, he begins training, almost as a reflex action for his next assault on the record books.
I'm still trying to find out what I could do. It's a yardstick against aging, so you measure whether you can still perform well enough or if you're just going downhill more or less. And I still think I could improve on one or the other categories of flight a little bit. And as long as I've got that feeling, I might come back to the others and see if it's really true, if I could improve my flights a little bit. But I do not have this insane drive to achieve things.
Regardless of what he might decide in 12 months' time, as to whether he's passed it or not, the phantom of perhaps a 1,400-kilometre flight still beckons.